The Star and D'Amico Show is brought to you by cheapesttshirts.ca. If you're looking for quality gear without overpaying, check out cheapesttshirts.ca. A huge selection for men, women, and kids. Hoodies, t-shirts, headwear, bags, even towels. Get this. Order today, ship today, delivery tomorrow. Style, value, and speed, all with cheapesttshirts.ca. Brought to you by Cabletel. For reliable alarm systems in Quebec and Eastern Ontario, you can trust Cabletel, servicing the region for more than 20 years. Expert installation and top-tier protection for your home or business. Visit cabletel.com. Email them info@cabletel.com to get secure today. It's Cabletel. Peace of mind you can count on. Brought to you by Morella's. Craving unforgettable steak and fine dining? Morella's Steakhouse on Highway 132, 15 minutes from downtown Montreal, brings you premium cuts, bold flavors, and an atmosphere that's perfect for any night out. From exceptional service to an outstanding wine list, this is where great meals become great memories. Reserve your next night out and go to morellasteakhouse.ca to reserve now. Taste excellence tonight. Brought to you by Little Bear. Looking for the best for your pet? LittleBearOnline.com with online orders. They're also available on Uber Eats. It's a family-owned business in Montreal that's been around for more than 30 years. Chuck, Evie, and their wonderful staff have all your needs taken care of because they care about your pet as much as you do, with the best prices on top brands from around the world. Toys, food, bedding, everything your pet could ever want. LittleBearOnline.com or visit their store on St. Catherine across from Westmount Square. Brought to you by McLean's. Get down to McLean's Pub, 1210 Peel Street in downtown Montreal. It's your go-to spot for great food, cold drinks, and big sports on the big screens. Classic pub food and a lively vibe only steps from all the action. Stop by today at McLean's, 1210 Peel Street. Good times and great company. Welcome to a fresh edition of the Star and D'Amico Show. There he is nodding accordingly. For those watching, those listening, thanks for checking us out on all your favorite podcast platforms. There's Marco D'Amico. I'm Sean Starr. You can follow Marco on your favorite socials at MN and read the latest from him through rg.org. Here we are reacting in the aftermath of Canadiens general manager Marco D'Amico, Kent Hughes, and his mid-season press conference. And interesting because there's lots to touch on. I took a lot of notes sitting on the couch watching on RDS here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And the progression is obviously very strong. Going back, 2 seasons ago, 41 points, 44 points, and now here past the midway point at 52 points, 2 points out of first place. And for me, I want to begin, I suppose, with the rebuild. One of the questions asked to general manager Kent Hughes about the timeline and saying that in his estimation, and I'm not one to disagree, your perspective on Kent Hughes and the rebuild, suggesting it's ahead of schedule.
Yeah, I think we could say that clearly, even dating back to the end of last season when they made the playoffs. I don't think many people had it in their on their crystal ball that the Canadians were going to make the playoffs last year at this time. Right? I think that's the real important part is at this time. Um to the way I see it, the Canadians have had to deal with significant adversity with the amount of injuries, Caden Gooley, Alex Newhook, Jake Evans, you name it, and are still right up there with the rest of the Eastern Conference. They've had to deal with, inconsistent goaltending right up there with everybody else in the Eastern Conference. So to me, are they ahead of schedule? Yes. And I think a lot of that has to do with the, Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield being point per game players. I think that definitely helps a rebuilding team right off the bat. But it's the fact that they're being lifted up, further by Lane Hudson, by Ivan Demidov, by Uri Slavkovsky. I think in having that secondary offense now and being able to produce from the back end, even with Noah Dobson as well. And now you have 2 pairings on the defensive side that are able to produce at 5-on-5. The Canadians didn't have that last year. So do I think they're ahead of schedule? Yes. But they also did things to get them ahead of schedule. The Phil Deneau trade was one of them. Again, we just talked about it, but going out and getting Noah Dobson,
Yeah.
that's gonna push anybody's timetable up a little bit when you go and get yourself a top end right shot defenseman, right? So part of it is that, part of it is the kids developing as well, and part of it is existing leadership that's doing its job and being able to consistently put up some numbers even when the team isn't playing its best.
I wanted to get into obviously when he was asked about the trade deadline, parity, playoff salary cap. We're going to touch on that, I promise. But you dropped Noah Dobson's name. I love the touch of humility from Ken Hughes when he admitted that he didn't think Lane Hutson was going to be this version of the player Hab fans are watching as quickly as he's developed into a star player. He's, mentioned the fact that he's watched Lane play for a really long time. His son played with Lane and perhaps a glimpse. I love the humility first and foremost, not pretending to be the sharpest visionary guy. Like he's human like everybody else. When he talked about Lane Hutson and maybe an explanation, Marco, of why Hutson was drafted where he was. But the reality is Hutson is a very special player. He's a price of admission player. And also mentioned further to Noah Dobson, he singled out a guy like Alex Carrier. He touched on Phil Deneau. He touched on Noah Dobson about getting players at the right time. So let's tie into the trade deadline coming up in March and the fact that, parity and playoff salary cap, he's expecting Marco. And even this summer, he mentioned the summer was quieter than usual and expecting maybe not much of fireworks ahead of the trade deadline coming up in less than 2 months now.
Yeah, I still think that, unrestricted free agents are going to be traded. They're just less because they're all getting signed. That's kind of the issue, right? So you expecting hockey trades in March, it's rarer than for that to happen. Those generally happen in the summer. I think where I would go one step though, and kind of, play devil's advocate because I know this for a fact. Kent Hughes is also masking a little bit in the sense that he's setting the table for the Canadians potentially standing pat if there is nothing available, which wouldn't be a bad thing. Honest to God, if there's nothing consistent available on the trade market that wouldn't require that would require an overpay, like I'm not looking at it. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
Kent Hughes, right? You have what you have, and you have all these injured players coming back. They don't need to splurge. This isn't, you heard him. This isn't the year they're going to contend. They don't think that they can keep up with teams. This team is not built to keep up with a Colorado Avalanche. His words, not mine. And so I feel like there's an understanding that playing well in the regular season is one thing. Continuing this pace in the playoffs is a completely different beast, and this team is still not yet ready for that. And that's totally fine considering they're ahead of schedule as is.
Well, let's tie in then as we talk about general manager Ken Hughes's vision for the trade deadline. And I like your angle of again not revealing all of the cards publicly in front of
Well, yeah.
a provincial audience and an NHL audience by and large. But we'll follow that up with the question that was asked about Oliver Kapanen. And he was very complimentary. The question along the lines of, can this young man be a 2C? And he more or less said yes without a doubt and went into like what it takes to appreciate a player like Oliver Kapanen, saying
Hmm.
you got to watch him play without the puck, offensively, defensively. You see how he, kind of, looks at the game. I'm not thinking that it changes the strategy, but it does, and he mentioned this also, like a lot of the answers in the injuries, Marco, have come from internally call ups and Texier or Sammy Blais that I
Hmm.
don't think we can shut the door totally on the possibility that Kapanen could be that guy. At least Ken Hughes perhaps hinted that he may.
Well, first and foremost, is there a some zero chance that Kapanen is going to be the Canadians' number two center? No. There's always a chance that he develops into that. The same way that not many people thought Thomas Plekanec was going to be much, and
Mm.
then put up a couple of 70-point seasons, right? So you really don't know. Again, I think we've gone on record enough to talk about where I find Kapanen's limitations are in terms of being able to create offense. I think he's a finisher, pun intended, as usual, every
Well
single
done.
time we talk about him.
Well done.
But I think what Ken Hughes was talking about is he knows how to find soft ice. And he said it, usually when the puck gets to a stick, it's because he's in a really good scoring opportunity because he placed himself there. That's why there is a chance that he could become the goal scoring number two center as long as you're playing with some elite playmakers. And I compound that with the fact of their, attempted hidden excitement at Michael Hage eventually turning pro.
Hmm.
Like that it's Michael Hage or that it's Oliver Kapanen that's your 2C. eventually it's just gonna work in the sense that one of them is gonna be in that slot, worst case. And if not, then you make a trade for it. But if you have these guys in the NHL and they're producing in the NHL in the years to come, you'll be able to make a more educated decision on what it is you need. In the meantime, of course, Kent Hughes is going to say that Oliver Kapanen, who is currently playing the number 2C role right now, can be a 2C of the future. Of course, he's going to say that. Could you imagine if he had said otherwise or hesitated?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
He's the
impact it
guy
would have
for
had on the
now, but
player?
he's not the long term vision. You know.
Exactly, exactly. So to take with a grain of salt, but not unmerited in any way, shape, or form. I think that he's thrived in the opportunity. I'm still of the mind that if this team is gonna contend, like be a top 3 team in this league, I think Oliver Kapanen probably just going to be like a gold mine 3C or an average 2C. But you look at a team like Florida, they had 2 second line centers playing second and third line, right? In Sam Bennett and Anton Lundell. Why can't it just be that for the Canadians? Imagine having a center line of Suzuki, Hage, and Kapanen, 1, 2, 3. That if they develop properly, that can give the Canadians the deepest center line they've had since the 90s. So to me, I think it's he consistently talked about we have players coming, we have young players coming. I think that's what's going to feed that narrative. But at the same time, by going out and saying that Oliver Kapanen can be the 2C of the future, you also make yourself less susceptible on the trade market when you're talking for a 2C, if ever it does come, where a team thinks you're desperate for one because you've already publicly said that you think Kapanen can handle it moving forward. So there's a little bit of public negotiation when someone says something like that or a GM expresses themselves like that. But I reiterate and say it's not unearned praise. So kudos to Oliver Kapanen. Absolutely.
I want to get into perhaps a glimpse into what Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon envision in terms of rounding out their roster. I like the anecdote where he said his wife said he's got like a gerbil in his brain, just never stops running when he's trying to sleep because he's always thinking about problem solving, always thinking about, as he said, putting the pieces of this roster together eventually. But before we get into that, let's talk about what I appreciated. I really like the way he manages. I touched on the humility from admitting that they're surprised Lane Hudson has turned into this version of a player when they drafted
Hmm.
him as quickly as he has. The other thing I appreciated, Marco, was the scouting of Michael Hage. Ken Hughes mentioned at his press conference that he went to go to Minnesota and he watched Michael Hage play 3 games. He had mentioned that he didn't even go talk to him, didn't want to distract him, just wanted to go and play his game and do his
Yeah.
thing. And then Marco followed that up by saying, listen, we're not putting pressure on this guy. It's a second year of uni. He even mentioned perhaps if he wants to continue his collegiate career or go to the next level of his hockey career, it's going to be up to the player to determine that. Yeah, your reaction to how Ken Hughes approached Michael Hage through Michigan, through the World Juniors, and really not putting more pressure on the young man.
Yeah, it's the cookie cutter answer for a general manager when it comes to players coming out of the NCAA. Not that I think it's disingenuous, far from it. It's straightforward. It's exactly what he's supposed to say. And and having had the conversation with Michael Hage directly myself, he consistently says like we'll reevaluate in April and we'll see where we're at or late March, depending on how far he goes in the NCAA playoffs. But again, like if he goes, you generally play about like 40, 45 games, about 40 games in the NCAA total. If he comes out of there and he's in the 60-point range at a point and a half per game, like you have nothing to gain going back. Absolutely nothing to gain going back. His defensive game has improved. He's physically developed. He's still got more to go, in my opinion, but he's physically developed. His defensive game, like I said, improved significantly. His offense, we saw it at the World Juniors, improved significantly. There's no need to rush this guy. And if he does sign his entry level contract, he will have to start with the Canadians at the end of this season, and he won't be able to be loaned to Laval. But I just think it's a natural progression. And as Kent Hughes says, if he continues the progression that he's had over the last 18 months, it's a slam dunk answer. He's on the same offensive trajectory that Cole Caulfield was on. So to me, being at 1.4 points per game in the NCAA, like playing on a top team, and you're the top, you're the play driver on that team, and you have Will Horkoff, who's the finisher. Like, he's in a really good place. Let it play out. Let's see what happens. But I put $2 on him signing with the Canadians come April.
There's Marco D'Amico. I'm Sean Starr. Thanks so much for being with us. More from General Manager Kent Hughes' midseason report card on his team.
Mhm.
Let's get into maybe a hint in terms of roster construction when he was asked in a roundabout way of wants and needs moving
Mm.
forward, and already talked about the pains of salary cap come the playoffs, the parity in the league, who's going to be the first to sell, but specifically mentioned playoff experience and physicality, something you and I
Yeah,
have talked about for a while now, the physical
yeah.
element, and then obviously the playoff experience. How do you choose to interpret what he means specifically? And I guess the second prong to that question from me to you would be, seems like that's more of a summer kind of target. Hard to envision that that's going to be done this year. So break it down for me.
Well, first and foremost, in regards to playoff salary cap, like, it's only the 20 players you dress that have to be under 95.5 million. So if you bring in you bring in more bottom six sandpaper, and then you have guys like Evans, Newhook, Doc that come back, and there are no trades other than that, and you bring in another piece to play on your bottom six, two of Brendan Gallagher, Patrick Laine, or maybe even Jake Evans. I doubt it because he's got the experience, but someone's going to sit. One of those guys is going to sit. So the salary cap that we see from the Canadians right now may not even be that. If Laine doesn't dress, the Canadians are flying in the playoffs in terms of salary cap space. They don't have a problem. So it's only the 20 players you dress, which I think gives the Canadians a little bit more leg room because they started the season with these guys on the roster, and they're going to have salary cap space once they get to the trade deadline. So it's going to be possible. The one thing I really appreciated, and this is something that for those that didn't catch on quick, really important point. Teams that may be selling, that they've identified, that could eventually get to a point where they may decide, we got to take another direction here. They've already reached out to and said, hey, if you guys ever decide to blow it up, we want to be part of those conversations. And what did he say in regards to that? He said they were very interested because we have a significant amount of prospects, a significant amount of young players already in the league, and a boatload of picks that they could trade if they wanted to get a deal done for the right player. And it's always about fit, it's always about opportunity cost, and it's always about how long those players are going to be sticking around. But that to me was probably the most interesting part because I know for a fact that they've done this with the St. Louis Blues. And so
Hmm.
St. Louis is one of them. They're currently in the basement of the NHL. This is a team that the Canadians have done a trade with in the past. Logan Mailloux for Zachary Bolduc. So we know that there's going to be other teams that add to the list. He thought Pittsburgh was going to be part of that list, and
I
they're
love
not
that
right
I
now.
love that no one asked him about Pittsburgh, but he just blurted out that he thought the Penguins are going to be in rebuild mode. And currently, as you and I talking right now, they're in a playoff position. They're one of the top 8.
Exactly, and Evgeny Malkin is back. So, they're going to be in a good position, are the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it may go down to the wire. It may go down to the wire for a lot of these teams. So I like the fact that he's setting it up right now where the Canadians are going to use this time to gather more information, to figure out what they need,
Hmm.
wait for some of the injured players to come back, and then make roster decisions accordingly. I think that was, to me, the wisest of it. But Kent Hughes never really gives away his game during these press conferences.
So it appears. And further to that, you talk about the injured players, and General Manager Ken Hughes several times put it at the feet of the coaching staff. It's going to be up to Martin St. Louis and his staff to assemble the roster when guys get back. And they talked about, look, things are going well. Then Evans goes down, and then Anderson goes down. Patrick Laine skating. It looks like his timeline to return is still on track.
Yep.
Obviously, disappointing that Anderson hasn't been skating, but nevertheless, what about the approach here? I mean, it's hard to be critical of the very patient. I mean, he mentioned it several times. They're going to be very deliberately patient with someone like Kirby Doc. And when they want him back, when they get him back, they want him to be fully healthy. But I also got the perspective that Ken Hughes didn't seem the most optimistic that his coaching staff is going to have a very healthy roster for the duration of the season. Talked about the condensed schedule, talked about the amount of injuries, but what about how they're handling the injuries and being very deliberate and being very patient, especially with Kirby Dach?
Well, they're in the position that they're in. There's no rush to bring these guys back, right? Like they're second in the Atlantic, first out of first place. Like they're
Crazy.
pushing.
Yeah.
They're pushing. So I don't think there's any rush to bring these guys back sooner than they have to be. And I think that's a luxury they haven't had yet since the start of this rebuild. And I think that speaks volumes. And at the same time, you get these guys to come back. Like you look at Caden Gooley's injury. Caden Gooley's injury was caused because he played through a groin
Mm,
injury and aggravated it. Well, because of that, believe you me, they're not going to force them back early where
right.
they can potentially not be at 100% and re aggravate an injury and be out even longer. So, with that in mind, I 100% understand it. They have enough players on the roster now anyway, so it gives them a little bit more time to figure out what they're going to do with them all. And then after that, they're going to make decisions based on that, be it via trade or waivers. But it affords them more opportunity and options. Just like, for example, the three goalie carousel, they said they
Exactly.
don't envision being a long term fixture for the Canadians.
So that's our next discussion point. I mean, you just led me in nicely about the three goalie system. And while it's not ideal, the reality is for the better part of 4 weeks, Montreal has been going to work with three different goaltenders. And clearly, Sam Montembeault's conditioning stint with Laval is the reason for the reality that is three goaltenders, but mentioned again the condensed schedule and while it's not ideal, it makes sense in the here and now. But also brought up, Sam Montembeault stealing arguably the number one job from Jake Allen at the time, and also mentioned that he's not a fan of putting titles labels on guys, but mentioned that the goalie that plays the best will also play the most. I mean, you can read into that if you so choose. You can go a couple of different ways.
Yeah.
For another talking point that you and I and the audience have had for a while now about what's best for Jacob Fowler. Fowler continues to play well if he's air quote playing the best. I
Mhm.
guess you can read into Fowler's not going anywhere.
Not just yet. No, but I think you do eventually see him go down if Montembeau and Dolbesch are able to kind of get into a groove. I think so, but I like that the vote of confidence he gave to Jacob Fowler and being, mature beyond his 21 years of age, and that even in a market like Montreal, he's not afraid. And I think that does go into the psychology examination that they have during the combines and in their conversations with the players before the draft. So they want to see what players would be able to handle that kind of pressure, and I think a guy like him absolutely can. So not too worried with Jacob Fowler. The only thing is how it ends. And I think that's he doesn't even know, right? Like that's the point. He wants to see this play out. He doesn't know yet. But at the same time, if Fowler is one of the answers, who's the odd man out and how is he out? Is he just, is Sam Montembeau waived? Is he traded? Is Dobesh sent to Laval because he's waiver exempt still? Like, I don't know. It creates a lot of conversation. It creates a lot of scenarios. And I think the best way, like you said, they're playing what 5 times in the next 7 days.
Yeah.
So he's going to use that time to further evaluate, but doesn't for I like this isn't lasting beyond February. By February, I believe that Jacob Fowler will be sent down because the AHL continues to play during the Olympic break.
Hmm.
So at least that I think that's the cutoff, if not earlier. But the Canadians definitely have time to figure it out.
Well, let's just riff on the Sam Montembeau angle for a second. Reading Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts, he talked, and one of the points he raised was Sam Montembeau saying that you can solve your problem or you can trade your problem. If you're trading a problem like that, you're at a disadvantage. Are they trying to shine him up or move him elsewhere? Talking about Sam Montembeau, it's just while it makes I get where you come from when you
Mhm.
present that point to your audience, but it to me it still falls on the lap, Marco, of how competitive the Canadians are, But seeing them roll with Dobesh and Fowler just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. I'm very out of these trade Sam Montembeault angle today.
I just don't see them going with two rookie goaltenders moving forward. I just don't. And I think it's fantasy land to assume that they would want to go and do that just because there are ups and downs.
Yeah.
And he wasn't going to say it then because Fowler has been doing so well. But there is going to come a time where there's going to be a dip in play. And at
Mm-hmm.
that point, you're going to want to have someone that's going to come in with experience and kind of show them the ropes and show them the way. And Montembeau's kind of going through that right now, right? So who better than to have a veteran backup? Because then that's what's going to happen. The moment they go with those two and they both struggle, well, the calls are going to be the Canadians need a veteran backup. And it's going to wind up being the same thing. So to me, like I have no problem with the Canadians trading Jakub Dobesh in a package for a need. I have no problem at all because they have other young goaltenders that are probably going to be able to turn pro in the next year or two that could be, playing in Laval. And, I think about a guy like Canton Miller, for example, out of the University of Denver that could potentially make the jump. You're going to have Volokin probably in the next 2 years. There's a lot of guys that could make the jump that could potentially find themselves in Laval. So I don't necessarily think there's a rush. In worst case, you can get, another Kako Kapanen
Mm.
style goalie, and that you can have two of them in Laval in case there are any injuries. But I still feel like they're going to want to solidify that. They're not going to want to go with inexperience all the way.
And final thought: are you more inclined after listening to Kent Hughes and all the points he raised and the I don't I'm even reluctant to use the word nuggets he dropped, but in relation to bolstering this roster ahead of the deadline, are you more or less inclined today to believe that that's still a path they're really going to, I'll phrase it this way, aggressively explore this season?
They'd like to, and I think he gave hints as to why it hasn't happened in bunches yet. Number one, availability. Not many players available on the trade market that makes sense. And two, when they are available and it makes sense, what's the price? And I think that's kind of why he jumped on Phil Deneau as quickly as he did. That all came together very quickly once it was found out that he was looking for a fresh start. Is he was aggressive on that because he himself said they had a clear identifiable need, and the fact that this has become a possession game,
Mm.
having a face-off specialist was an absolute need, especially as a left shot. So they saw that as a need. They saw the acquisition cost wasn't out of this world, and Phil Deneau can always extend at a much cheaper price at the end of his contract if he wants to stick around. So, you know, it's a win-win altogether, and it's no risk for Kent Hughes. That's the kinds of trades I see him doing. Is those kinds of trades where you have a player that suddenly becomes available, and
Hmm.
the acquisition cost for whatever reason isn't astronomical. Because right now, with the lack of sellers, prices are very high. Look at Igor Chinikov,
Yep.
got a second and a third, and Denton Heinen, right? Like I would never have thought he would have gotten that with the season he was having. But that's how
Hmm.
static the trade market is right now. So it is what it is. And that's why he doesn't expect a very exciting trade deadline. But all it takes is a couple of phone calls, a couple of teams that decide to, wave the white flag. And all of a sudden that kind of changes.
Anything else that I haven't brought up that you took away from? Again, it wasn't very lengthy chat, but
No, it's a good
anything
half hour.
else? Anything else?
Um, I think just that they're not going to rush it. And I
No,
like
clearly,
that.
yeah, yeah.
I like that. They're not going to rush it. Like they're talking about bringing in guys and funneling them into the lineup and making sure that you're not blocking anybody from getting in and so on and so forth. Like I really like that because it does bring a tempered approach. But what I like that he said is they're in this like weird in between right now where they're not contending, but they're not rebuilding. And he's like, this is the era where he's going to require the most amount of discipline so that he makes the right moves so that they can be contenders long term. And so that's why I don't think they're going to be making any rash uh you know knee jerk trades just because a certain player becomes available if the price point is not doesn't line up with what they're looking for.
I'm Sean Starr. There's Marco D'Amico. You can read all his Montreal Canadiens coverage with RG Media. And of course, like and subscribe to our YouTube show. And stay tuned for daily Habs content right here for all the reactions from around the Montreal Canadiens. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.